I hope you enjoy this hero's journey into the realm of philosophy, psychology, and physics. If you want to help me create more content like this, please subscribe and consider sponsoring me here on YouTube. I also want to thank the Platonic Mystery School of the Divine Infinite Being for sponsoring this course, and you can check that school out at divineinfinitebeing.com. We've gone over the Eastern cosmology of the Vedanta philosophy of India and the Taoist and Confucian philosophies of China, and now we're moving to Western philosophy. We heard earlier Alfred North Whitehead refer to the history of European philosophy as a series of footnotes to Plato, so we'll be spending a lot of time studying Plato's cosmology, which is especially pertinent to this class because I'm trying to explain why we should take a Kierkegaardian leap of faith in the psyche equals singularity equation, which is based on a fusion of Leonard Susskind's holographic string theory and Jung's archetypal psychology. Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli both equated the Jungian theory of the archetypes of the collective unconscious with Plato's theory of the absolute ideas. And we will see here that Plato's cosmology of a spherical universe with a soul in the central point that also encompasses the cosmic horizon is the first statement of Jung's theory of the archetypes of the collective unconscious mind. They fit together perfectly, and therefore they fit together perfectly with the Susskind-Jung synthesis, which can be distilled into the psyche equals singularity equation. So we begin with Plato's dialogue, the Timaeus, which features Socrates discussing philosophy with Timaeus. Timaeus is the one telling us most about the shape of the universe and the way God created the universe and superimposed the material universe onto the spiritual framework. This is the cosmology that was extremely influential throughout the Middle Ages. And notice the subtitle here, from the center to the circumference. The main point is that the universe is described as a sphere with a soul in the central point that also encompasses the outer border of the universe. So here is Timaeus describing the cosmos to Socrates. Such was the whole plan of the eternal God about the God, meaning the cosmos, that was to be. He made it smooth and even, having a surface in every direction equidistant from the center, a body entire and perfect, and formed out of perfect bodies. And in the center he put the soul, which he diffused throughout the body, making it also to be the exterior environment of it, and he made the universe a circle moving in a circle. Continuing in the Timaeus, he says, now when the Creator had framed the soul according to his will, he formed within her the corporeal universe, and brought the two together and united them center to center. The soul, interfused everywhere from the center to the circumference of heaven, of which also she is the external envelopment, herself turning in herself, began a divine beginning of never ceasing and rational life enduring throughout all time. And the final quote for this slide from the Timaeus, for as the universe is in the form of a sphere, all the extremities, being equidistant from the center, are equally extremities, and the center, which is equidistant from them, is equally regarded as the opposite of them all. So you see here reiterated, according to Timaeus, who's speaking to Socrates, the universe is a sphere with a soul in the central point that's interfused everywhere throughout the volume of the universe and envelops the entire universe as the exterior border. That is very consistent with the equation psyche equals singularity, because I'm equating the soul with the gravitational singularity, which is in the central point of the universe and causes the Big Bang from which all of space-time emerges. And that central singularity also encompasses the horizon of the cosmos, where space-time is receding at the speed of light. It exists at each point of that enveloping sphere for the reasons we've been discussing throughout this class. Plato's Timaeus, cosmic horizon as mother and receptacle of all created things. So now we'll see how, in addition to saying that the soul is in the central point and the outermost sphere of the universe, the outermost sphere is described as the mother of all created things. And it's this intermediary realm between the eternal spiritual world and the temporary material world. Timaeus, cosmic horizon is mother and receptacle of all created things. Timaeus calls the cosmic horizon the, quote, mother and receptacle of all created and visible and in any way sensible things, an invisible and formless being which receives all things and in some mysterious way partakes of the intelligible and is most incomprehensible. So the intelligible is his word for the eternal realm of absolute ideas that can be understood with reason but cannot be perceived with the five material sense organs. So the cosmic horizon is the mother and receptacle of all the things that you can see with your eyes and hear with your ears and perceive through your bodily sense organs. An invisible and formless being. So notice how similar this is to Susskind's description of the cosmic horizon, which only exists from certain perspectives. According to his principle of cosmic complementarity, if you were to follow a bit of information toward what we here on Earth would perceive as the horizon of the cosmos, or space-time is receding at the speed of light, if you were to follow that bit of information, you would glide right past the horizon. You wouldn't notice anything different at all, but you would not be able to return to what we perceive on Earth to be the observable universe. You would go outside the border of our universe. However, if you were remaining on Earth and watching that person follow that bit of information toward the horizon of the cosmos, you would see all of the strings of which each atom of that person is made slow down and then smear out all around the inner sphere of the universe. And then each bit of information describing that person and the original bit of information that he was following would gradually radiate back in to the volume of space on the cosmic microwave background radiation, the echo of the Big Bang, on the extremely elastic but extremely fundamental strings of energy. So in the Timaeus, we don't see a description of these fundamental strings. We do see that in the myth of at the end of the Republic, the near-death experience of a soldier named and these fundamental cosmic strings are referred to there as threads of destiny. So we'll come to that, but the point for this slide is that in the Timaeus, the horizon of the cosmos is described in a way that's extremely similar to Susskind's description of the holographic cosmic horizon. It's there from one perspective, it's not there from another. That's cosmic complementarity. And each bit of information describing the three-dimensional volume of space is recorded at each point of that two-dimensional spherical horizon. Two-dimensional meaning it's only got one side. It's got no depth. It's got no extension in the third dimension. Although it is spherical, it's bent in. It's actually, considering the universe as a four-dimensional hypersphere, which we normally cannot imagine with imagery in our minds. At any rate, the point is information conservation at the cosmic horizon. According to Carl Jung, all of the eternal archetypes of the collective unconscious mind manifest in different ways throughout different cultures, in different countries, in different centuries throughout human history. But that we can see resemblances between ancient and modern ideas because they're all rooted in these timeless archetypal forms. Holographic string theory, which was inherent in the mathematics of string theory that evolved out of quantum mechanics and general relativity and special relativity, has revealed this archetypal cosmology, which was first recorded in the Western world clearly by Plato in various dialogues, including the Timaeus. So continuing with the Timaeus, he says the mother substance becomes the four material elements, fire, water, earth, and air, insofar as she receives the impressions of them. So the cosmic horizon is impressed with all of the material elements that we'll now discuss. Plato's Timaeus, cosmic horizon as intermediate between spiritual and material worlds. So Timaeus asks, is there any self-existent fire? Do all those things which we call self-existent exist? Or are only those things which we see or in some way perceive through the bodily organs truly existent? So the question is, are there these absolute eternal ideas, these eternal spiritual forms? Or is the only thing that's real is what we can perceive through our five bodily sense organs? If we can't see it, smell it, touch it, taste it, or hear it, is it still real? The empiricist philosophers like David Hume say, no, it isn't. Plato, a rationalist philosopher, says yes, it's more real. The things that you can't perceive with your bodily sense organs, but can understand with your reason, are the eternal truths, and the things that your body can perceive are these temporary, dream-like, shadowy illusions. They're never the same from one moment to the next. They're projections from the deeper reality, and those eternal forms, these self-existent forms, these first principles of reality, exists specifically at the horizon of the cosmos, which is a dead ringer comparison with holographic string theory and the principle of holographic information conservation. So continuing here, Timaeus says there is a third nature, which is space and is eternal. So space here is the ether element, the akasha from the Vedanta cosmology. It's the cosmic horizon. It's the intermediary between the volume of space, which is the material temporary world, and the eternal forms, which exist in the spiritual world, and the cosmic horizon is the intermediary between these two realms. So there is a third nature, which is space and is eternal and admits not of destruction and provides a home for all created things, and is apprehended when all sense is absent by a kind of spurious reason and is hardly real, which we, beholding as in a dream, say of all existence that it must of necessity be in some place and occupy a space, but that what is neither in heaven nor in earth has no existence. For an image, since the reality after which it is modeled does not belong to it, and it exists ever as the fleeting shadow of some other, must be inferred to be in another, or it could not be at all. So that's kind of a complicated paragraph. A spurious reason is hardly real, this mother substance, cosmic horizon, which corresponds to the quintessence, the fifth essence, the ether element. As we'll see in a moment, in the Timaeus, Plato describes that astronomer saying that all of the material elements are made of these fundamental triangles that combine together to form the Platonic solids, earth, water, fire, air, and then the outermost element is ether, and it corresponds to the spherical horizon of the cosmos. But I like the way he describes this as it is apprehended when all sense is absent by a kind of spurious reason and is hardly real. According to cosmic complementarity, the cosmic horizon is hardly real. It's not there if you go out with your physical body to observe it. It keeps receding. With every inch you move forward, it recedes an inch. If you were looking through some incredibly powerful telescope from Earth, then it would seem real. You could see things smearing out around that horizon of the cosmos. It exists and it doesn't exist, and it's this intermediary realm between the eternal spiritual world and here in the material world. When people have near-death experiences, we see that they say they ended up out at this point of no return. Literally at the horizon of the cosmos, Carl Jung said, where the past, the present, and the future are interwoven. We each here live in a little cube of illusion tethered to the horizon by the thread. Well, the way Carl Jung describes the horizon is similar to the way Susskind describes the cosmic horizon, which is similar to the way Plato describes the cosmic horizon in the Timaeus. Plato's Timaeus, cosmic horizon, the ether and the four elements. So continuing with Timaeus' description of cosmology, he says, in this manner the four kinds of elements, earth, water, fire, and air, were then shaken by the receiving vessel, that's the cosmic horizon, which, moving like a winnowing machine, scattered far away from one another the elements most unlike and forced the most similar elements into close contact. The receiving vessel is the cosmic horizon, the mother substance. It also corresponds to the fifth element, the ether. So let me just read what I've written here. The four elements are made of atomic triangles that form the first four Platonic solids. Timaeus later equates the receiving vessel that projects the four elements with the fifth element, ether, which he describes as a spherical dodecahedron, that agrees with the Vedanta cosmology of the ether, or akasha. So, in the Vedanta cosmology, the outermost sphere, which is the ether element in some Vedic scriptures and some Upanishads, and then in others, there's included three more subtle material elements, mind, intelligence, and false ego, but in whichever model you're looking at, it's always the outermost sphere that contains the past, the present, and the future of the interior of the universe. Now, these Platonic solids, if you see this picture on the left, that is a picture drawn by Johannes Kepler. It's called Mysterium Cosmographicum. It was in 1596, and he was trying to make a model of Plato's cosmology in the Timaeus, these perfectly symmetrical three-dimensional shapes. There's only 5 of them. They're called the Platonic solids because Plato wrote about them in the Timaeus. And now I want to read a little bit from one of the founders of string theory who discovered the geometrical shapes called the Calabi-Yau manifolds, around which the strings are woven to create the atomic particles, the atomic elements. Xing-Tung Yau, we'll be talking about him in the next slide, but I want to read here what he says about the Platonic solids. So he's writing in his book, The Shape of Inner Space, String Theory, and the Geometry of the Universe, Xing-Tung Yao, along with Steve Nadas. But he writes, Earth would thus consist of tiny cubes, the air of octahedrons, fire of tetrahedrons, and water of icosahedrons. One other construction, a fifth, still remained, Plato wrote in Timaeus, referring to the dodecahedron, and this one god used for the whole universe, embroidering figures on it. So this shape, the dodecahedron, the god embroidered figures on this object, which is similar to the way the past, the present, and the future are interwoven into the cosmic horizon. So a dodecahedron, on the one hand, Timaeus clearly describes the universe as a sphere. Then he describes the mother substance, the cosmic horizon, as being real and yet not quite real. Here he's equating it with a dodecahedron, so it seems to be a spherical dodecahedron that exists and doesn't exist at the same time. The existing and not existing at the same time can be equated with Susskind's principle of cosmic complementarity. But what about the dodecahedron? I think it's just interesting to note that in Nature magazine on October 9th, 2003, they put out a report about a French astronomer who says that the cosmic horizon is the shape of a spherical dodecahedron. And so I'll read a little bit here from The Economist magazine, which summarized that article. The shape of the universe, Platonic truths. I'm reading here from the endnotes to Psyche and Singularity. Data from an American satellite suggest that the universe is a dodecahedron. October 9th, 2003. There are 5 Platonic solids of perfect symmetry, and then skipping down, as Plato put it, God used this solid, the dodecahedron, for the whole universe, embroidering figures on it. Skipping down a little bit, for Jean-Pierre Luminet of the Paris Observatory and his colleagues believe that the universe is indeed a dodecahedron. They based their argument on data collected by the Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe WMAP. This American satellite has been examining the microwave radiation generated shortly after the universe began. So they're looking at the cosmic microwave background radiation, which corresponds, like a musical note, corresponds to certain shapes of musical instruments. So does this microwave radiation correspond to certain shapes. And the shape that they equate with the microwave radiation is a spherical dodecahedron. So it's just interesting. They would point out the parallels with Plato's Timaeus. The main point for our class is that the cosmic horizon is the memory bank of the universe. It contains the past, the present, and the future of the entire universe. And it projects the physical objects that we perceive are projected from the cosmic horizon, scattered far away from one another, the elements, this receiving vessel. It contains the fundamental elements and it projects them into the volume of space. That's what we've seen so far from Plato's Timaeus. Xing-Tung Yao on Plato's Timaeus. We just read a little bit from Xing-Tung Yao's book about Plato's Timaeus. So let me just read the slide. Xing-Tung Yao is the Harvard mathematician who co-discovered the geometrical shapes of the 6 compactified dimensions of space around which the fundamental strings are wound to create quantum particles. Susskind personally told Yao that the Calabi-Yau manifolds are the DNA of string theory. Yao begins and ends his book by paying deference to Plato's Timaeus. So here is the discoverer of the DNA of string theory. So his opinions clearly matter to the Psyche equals singularity equation, which is based on the fusion of holographic string theory and Jungian psychology. So here's what Yao says. Let us end where we began, looking to the past in the hopes of gleaning hints about the road ahead. The year was 387 BC or thereabouts when Plato established his academy, which is sometimes referred to as the world's first major university. Even though the particulars of Plato's theory of everything, as outlined in the Timaeus, strike the modern sensibility as absurd, if not borderline psychotic, there are many parallels between his picture of the universe and that embodied in string theory. So that's quite a lot of good support from someone who's very central to the evolution of holographic string theory, saying that there's a lot of parallels between Plato's cosmology and string theory. Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli both said that the laws of physics and psychology should mirror each other because they both arise from the same archetypes of the collective unconscious, which they both equated with Plato's theory of the absolute ideas. In his dialogues, Plato says these absolute ideas exist specifically out at the spherical horizon of the cosmos, the mother substance. He adds the fundamental ingredient of cosmic strings in the myth of Earth, the end of the Republic. These parallels are so precise that it should give us good reason to take a leap of faith in the idea that psyche equals singularity and therefore also the spherical horizon of the cosmos. Plato's Republic, the divided line. So this is another one of Plato's most famous dialogues, probably the most famous one, the Republic, which he depicts Socrates discussing a conversation that he had with Plato's two brothers Glaucon and Adimantas. In the preface to the Timaeus, he indicates that Socrates spoke this dialogue, the Republic, the day before, and now he expects Timaeus to tell a story about the universe, and that is what Timaeus does in that dialogue. So the Timaeus is seen as a continuation of the conversation about the Republic. So now we'll look at the theory of absolute ideas and the idea of the cosmic horizon as presented in the Republic. The divided line. Socrates divides existence into 4 levels, represented by a vertical line divided into 2 unequal parts, and they represent the eternal and the temporal world, each of which is again divided in the same proportion. So he says, picture a line divided into 2 unequal portions. The bigger portion represents the eternal world, the smaller portion represents the temporal material world. Now, using the same ratio, divide each of those lines again, so that the temporal world is subdivided into the smallest of all segments at the bottom, and then the second largest above that one, and that represents the material world. And then the spiritual world has 2 segments, the smaller of which is mathematical forms, as we'll see, and then the higher realm of the absolute ideas. So first and lowest level equals 2D shadows and reflected images of 3D objects. Second level equals 3D objects, which are shadows of the next level up. The third level, which is the first level of the spiritual world, is mathematical forms, which are shadows of the next level up. The fourth level equals eternal spiritual forms or ideas, of which our temporary material forms are like a dream. So the image we have on the left I could get for free, so that's why it's written in French, but the words there are pretty similar to the English words, and the divided line here we see it represented horizontally rather than vertically, but you see el visible, el visible, I don't know how you would pronounce this in French, but images is the smallest level of the visible world. That means shadows, 2-dimensional shadows of 3-dimensional objects, and 2-dimensional mirror images of 3-dimensional objects. And each of these levels of reality corresponds to a level of knowledge. So from baseless opinions up to absolute knowledge, they correspond to these 4 levels of reality. The lowest level is 2-dimensional shadows and images of 3-dimensional objects, which is the next level up in the visible world. 3-dimensional physical objects like our physical bodies and all the objects that we perceive that obey the laws of physics are like shadows of the first and lowest level of the spiritual world, which are mathematical objects, or the mathematical forms. So you can describe the movements of all of the various 3-dimensional objects using the same mathematical formulas discovered by the physicists like Isaac Newton and Einstein, and the quantum physicists like Heisenberg and Schrödinger and Pauli, and the string theorists like Leonard Susskind and Gerard 't Hooft and Michio Kaku and Brian Greene. What those guys study, even though they were for the most part atheists, not Einstein and Pauli or Heisenberg and Schrödinger, so at any rate, Michio Kaku is, Brian Greene is, Leonard Susskind is, the string theorists. What they're studying, whether they believe in a spiritual world or not, are the eternal mathematical forms that Plato talked about. It's a big question. Are there these things, these eternal forms that shape and create the material world we perceive? Well, that can be asked in another way. Do the physicists discover the mathematical forms of their formulas, or do they invent them and create them? Most physicists think they discover them, that what they discover is already inherent in the laws of mathematics, which for some strange reason correspond to the material world and the way it behaves. Why should these eternal mathematical forms be so perfectly related to the temporary visible forms by describing the way they interact? As Plato presents that as evidence for this other spiritual world of eternal spiritual forms, the mathematical forms are just shadows of this higher realm of absolute ideas, like the absolute idea of tree and cloud and person and anything that you can experience, and all of them can be reduced to or contained in, all of them radiate from, the absolute idea of the good, which I equate with the gravitational singularity. So now we'll see how Plato depicts Socrates explaining the divided line in the cave allegory. Plato's Republic, the cave allegory. So I don't have any written words for this slide, I just have this big image and I'll describe the cave allegory. So the divided line we just went over. To help explain that to Glaucon and Adimantas and the other interlocutors, Socrates creates this allegory of the cave. He said, imagine somebody, or imagine people at birth taken down to an underground cave. Then they're chained head to foot so that all they can do is look at the back wall of the cave. Now behind them there's a wall that rises halfway up to the ceiling of the cave, and behind that wall guards carry silhouettes of three-dimensional objects from outside of the cave up on sticks. Above the entrance to the cave is a blazing bright fire. The fire casts the shadows of the silhouettes onto the back wall. All the prisoners ever see are the shadows on the back wall. According to the way Socrates describes it, they can also see their own shadows, which is not depicted here in this picture. They can see their own shadows, they can see the shadows of their neighbors, they can see the shadows of the silhouettes. And they pride themselves on who can predict which shadow will come before and which shadow will come after the others. The guards, some of them have a distinctive gait to their step, some of them might have a cough. The prisoners can hear the guards shuffling, and the echo of that sound bounces off the wall, so they think that the shadows are paired with these particular sounds, and some of them are very clever and they can predict the order and the sequence of the shadows. That's the highest form of knowledge for these prisoners. Well, now, Socrates says, imagine someone coming down from above into the underground cave, cutting the chains of one of the prisoners and turning him around and saying, look at the fire that's causing the shadows that you see. Well, the prisoner, having never seen light directly, would be blinded by the fire, wouldn't be able to see anything. He'd think what this so-called liberator is really doing is driving him insane and torturing him, and he wish he could be just back where he was before, where things were real and normal. Then the person from outside of the cave drags the prisoner up the rough and steep ascent to the outer world. Now, as the fire blinded his eyes, the sun totally blinds him and he feels intense pain. All he can see are things at nighttime. Eventually he can see reflections of the moon in the puddles of water and reflections of trees in the puddle of water by day. Gradually he can start to walk around in the daylight and see objects like trees and rabbits and whatever else you can perceive in the natural world, until finally he can take a glimpse at the sun itself, and then he realizes this is the source of everything in the visible material world outside of the cave. It's also the source of the cave and the fire and everything that you could see within the cave. And then he realized how horrible his situation in the cave had been, whereas while he was there he thought this is normal, everything's fine. Then someone says, okay, now you've been liberated from the cave, it's your turn to go back down into the cave and liberate other people. So the prisoner goes back into the cave, only now he's blinded by the darkness, whereas formerly his eyes had been adjusted to the darkness and he was blinded by the light. Now the reverse is true. So it takes him some time to reacclimate his eyes to the darkness. In the meantime, the other prisoners, he approaches them and he says, you're in a cave, you're chained up head to foot, you're looking at shadows on the back wall of a cave. They have no idea what he's talking about. They have no way of conceiving what he means. And furthermore, he can't even see the shadows very well anymore, and they think he's lost his mind. They think he's gone blind and he's gone crazy, and they would rather kill him than let him inflict them with whatever madness that he is suffering from. But gradually, the prisoner returning to the cave's eyes adjusts to the darkness, and now he can predict which shadows will come in which sequence 10,000 times better than all of the other prisoners, because all he has to do is turn his head around and see which guards are queuing up with which silhouettes. Then he liberates another prisoner, and it goes on like that. So Socrates concludes the allegory by saying that as the sun in the world outside the cave is in relation to the fire inside the cave, so is the idea of the good, the spiritual sun, in relation to the visible sun. And that the highest goal of knowledge is to open the eye of the soul to this idea of the good, the spiritual sun, which contains all of the other absolute ideas which project this dream world that we experience here in the material realm. Plato's Republic, The idea of the good. So here's a quote from Socrates about the idea of the good. In the visible, it gave birth to light, and its sovereign, meaning the sun. In the intelligible, itself sovereign, it provided truth and intelligence. And the man who's going to act prudently in private or in public must see it. So, according to the Big Bang cosmology, the gravitational singularity gave birth to light at the Big Bang. Well, if the singularity gave birth to light, then according to Socrates, it also gave birth to truth and intelligence in the spiritual world. Earlier, I equated Plato's idea of the good with Goloka Vrindavan, Krishna's original spiritual planet filled with spiritual forms, according to the Vedanta cosmology. So just keep that in mind, that these archetypal forms of knowledge, which have most recently re-emerged as holographic string theory, have existed in cultures in the past, and indeed the two most important philosophical pillars of the East and the West, the Vedanta cosmology and Plato's cosmology. Continuing in the Republic, Socrates says, even so, this organ of knowledge must be turned around from the world of becoming together with the entire soul, until the soul is able to endure the contemplation of essence and the brightest region of being. And this, we say, is the good, do we not? The brightest region of being is a gravitational singularity. It contains all light. It's the source of light. It's infinitely bright. It gives electromagnetic radiation in the visible world, and it provides truth and intelligence, consciousness itself, in the spiritual world. Plato's Republic, Brian Greene on holographic string theory and the cave allegory. So Brian Greene, I really enjoyed watching his videos and reading his books. He's an excellent educator. He's also an atheist. Nevertheless, he sees a parallel between Plato's cave allegory and holographic string theory, although he sees it as being inverted, and I'll address that after I read from his book, The Fabric of the Cosmos. Whereas Plato envisioned common perceptions as revealing a mere shadow of reality, the holographic principle concurs, but turns the metaphor on its head. The shadows, the things that are flattened out and hence live on a lower dimensional surface, are real, while what seem to be the more richly structured higher dimensional entities, us, the world around us, are evanescent projections of the shadows. While it is a fantastically strange idea, and one whose role in the final understanding of space-time is far from clear, to Hooft and Susskind's so-called holographic principle is well motivated. So Brian Greene embraces holographic string theory and the idea of information conservation at the cosmic horizon. Notice he says that the holographic principle turns Plato's cave allegory on its head, because, according to the holographic principle, past, the present, and the future are conserved eternally at each point of the two-dimensional spherical horizon of the cosmos. And these three-dimensional objects that we inhabit and are surrounded by are holographic projections from that two-dimensional holographic film at the horizon. I say that it doesn't turn Plato's cave allegory on its head, because if you remember the near-death experiences, people who go out to that horizon of the cosmos don't experience it as a two-dimensional film. They experience it as a deeper, eternal, spiritual reality where the past, the present, and the future coexist. From our geocentric perspective, it's as if it's a two-dimensional sphere, but disembodied psyches who go there during near-death experiences, which we'll be analyzing at the end of Plato's Republic, recall a world of eternal forms. So it's not turning Plato's cave allegory on its head, it's helping us turn the eye of the soul and our entire soul around, from the outer world that we perceive to the inner world of the psyche, upon which all of the absolute forms are also imprinted. This is an important point. According to Plato, not only are all of the absolute ideas imprinted on the holographic, well, he doesn't call it holographic, but they're imprinted on the mother substance of the cosmic horizon, which contains the past, the present, and the future. But those same absolute ideas are imprinted on each and every one of our eternal souls. That you can see the cosmic horizon by turning the eye of the soul inward towards your own soul, which implies, recalling Leibniz's principle of the identity of indiscernibles, that our individual souls are somehow one with the universal soul. Plato's Republic, Brian Greene on holographic string theory and the cave allegory. So in another book, The Hidden Reality, Brian Greene again comments on the parallels between holographic string theory and information conservation at the cosmic horizon and Plato's cave allegory. 2 millennia later, it seems that Plato's cave may be more than a metaphor. To turn his suggestion on its head, reality, not its mere shadow, may take place on a distant boundary surface, while everything we witness in the 3 common spatial dimensions is a projection of that faraway unfolding. Reality, that is, may be akin to a hologram, or really a holographic movie. So again, he says, turning Plato's cave allegory on its head. It does not turn Plato's cave allegory on its head. Plato says in the Timaeus, which is linked to the Republic, their consecutive conversations, that the absolute ideas exist out at the boundary of the spherical universe. Distant boundary surface is the place where the absolute ideas exist and from which they project these temporary material forms that we perceive. The string of this projection is found at the end of the Republic in the myth of But again, I think it's extremely important that someone as well respected in the field of physics as Brian Greene repeatedly points out this parallel between Plato's most famous cave allegory and holographic string theory. If that parallel exists, that's enormously important evidence in favor of Jung and Pauli's theory that the laws of physics and psychology mirror each other. And it's enormously powerful evidence in support of Jung's theory that myth and science unfold from the same archetypes of the collective unconscious mind, so that we can find parallels between what here would be considered Plato's mythology in the cave allegory and Susskind's holographic string theory. There's an even more direct link. I wouldn't say more direct. If they're rooted in the same archetype, that's a very direct link. But importantly to note is that Plato establishes the mathematical curriculum to enable the philosopher king to open the eye of the soul to the idea of the good in the Republic, as we'll see. And Susskind inherited that tradition, and true to Plato's hopes, has brought mathematical physics full circle back to this idea of the universe as a sphere where the past, the present, and the future are conserved on the outermost boundary and projected in on fundamental threads. That cannot be just a coincidence. It's powerful, in my mind, undeniable evidence in favor of Jung and Pauli's theory, of Plato's own theory. Powerful enough evidence that it should be much easier to take this leap of faith in the idea that yes, we are one with this universal soul, which I've translated from Jung's equation for the psyche equals highest intensity in the smallest space. That can be translated as psyche equals singularity. To take a leap of faith in that equation enables even the scientifically skeptical mind in the 21st century to believe that each of us is an eternal servant of the supreme God. And the argument that I've been arguing throughout this entire class is that if we don't believe that, whether God exists or not, and I think the evidence indicates that God does exist, but whether God exists or not, the human psyche requires this faith in order to find individuation, this union of all opposites in a healthy and complete psychological and physical life. Plato's Phaedrus, eternal forms at the cosmic horizon. So we'll be returning to the Republic in a moment, but just to reiterate this most important point, that the absolute ideas exist at the cosmic horizon, we turn to the Phaedrus. Similar to the Katha Upanishad, in the Phaedrus, Socrates explains that in between embodied lives, reincarnating souls ride chariots behind 2 winged horses. One obeys reason, the other bodily desire. To follow the procession of one or the other of 11 different demigods, occasionally the gods go to feast, at which point, and this is the quote from the Phaedrus, they move up the steep to the top of the vault of heaven. The mortals who follow the gods have a difficult time, and few of them reach the topmost destination where the gods, and this is another quote, stand upon the outside of heaven and behold the things beyond. They perceive justice and temperance and knowledge absolute, as well as the other true existences, after which they come back down to the interior of the heavens and return home. So the absolute ideas like justice, temperance, all the absolute forms of spiritual knowledge, which exist eternally, the first principles upon which and from which our material world is projected, exist out at the outermost sphere of the universe, the outside of this cosmic sphere. The idea of the good is the universal mandala formed by the central singularity and spherical horizon. The eternally perfect, absolute forms of knowledge or ideas all exist at the horizon of the cosmos. This is the essential point. It is so important to understand these parallels between Plato's cosmology of the absolute ideas out at the cosmic horizon and holographic string theory is to have all the reasons I think you need to take a leap of faith in the psyche equals singularity equation, that each of us is one with the central soul which encompasses the spherical horizon of the cosmos. So returning to the Republic, the myth of and the threads of destiny, NDE at the cosmic horizon. As mentioned earlier in the slides on Pim van Lommel, Plato concludes the Republic with the near-death experience account of his soldier named who woke up on his own funeral pyre. First, he had a vision of the parallel openings in the sky and on the ground, which is reminiscent of the typical tunnel vision of an NDE. Then recalled how his disembodied psyche rose above the cosmos, which he saw as a series of 8 nested hemispheres or upward-facing bowls, from where he was able to see how the moral habits each psyche develops on Earth influence the fate it chooses for the next life, which manifests as the threads of destiny. So there's the key ingredient here. Out at the horizon of the cosmos, each reincarnating soul receives a thread of destiny, which is woven into that outermost sphere and then in through the concentric spheres centering on Earth. Now, the way Plato depicts the universe in the myth of is a series of hemispheres, half circles nested like bowls. And one commentator I read said that this is probably just to help us see the way the spherical universe is organized. In the Timaeus, the universe is a sphere. Here it's described as a hemisphere so that you can imagine these ridges, the edges of these nested bowls. Each of the edge corresponds to a particular orbit of the planets around Earth. So this is a geocentric cosmology. The planets revolve around the Earth. From our perspective on Earth, that is how we perceive things. I think it's also interesting to note that although Copernicus established the heliocentric, sun-centric astronomy, which overthrew Platonic cosmology, special relativity and general relativity, especially general relativity, returned us to a geocentric cosmology, because no matter where you go in the universe, you will perceive yourself as the central point away from which all of the rest of the universe expands at an accelerating rate. So here we are on Earth, therefore necessarily from our perspective it seems as if the entire universe is expanding away from the central Earth. So continuing here, these threads of destiny are woven by 3 sister goddesses, the Fates, representing past, present, and future, first into the rim of the outermost hemisphere, the celestial sphere of fixed stars, and then into the rim of each concentric hemisphere, the orbits of the planets visible to the naked eye, the outermost of which is Saturn, then Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Moon, centering on Earth. In the Timaeus, the spheres of the universe corresponded to the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and then ether, which is similar to the Upanishads. Here in the Republic, the spheres, or it's presented as nested hemispheres, represent the orbits of the planets. But the main point is that there is the idea of information conservation at the outermost sphere. The Fates, the 3 sisters who represent time, the past, the present, and the future, they spin these hemispheres as they weave the threads of destiny, first into the outermost edge of the universe and then in through the planetary orbits to the central Earth, so that your destiny is interwoven with the orbits of the planets, which is related to astrology, as we'll see at the end of this class. We'll return to the myth of at the end of this class and talk about the implications of astrology that are present here in this model of the nested hemispheres. Now, the main point is that the final ingredient of the fundamental threads of holographic string theory is presented in the myth of the near-death experience of the soldier named It's also important that Carl Jung had a near-death experience which is extremely similar to the myth of And of course, the correlation with holographic string theory is clear. If you combine the cosmology of the Republic and the Phaedrus and the Timaeus, you have all of the essential ingredients of Susskind's description of our universe. Now, you don't have the multiverse of bubble universes. There's just one universe in Plato's model. You do have the multiverse in the Vedanta cosmology. The myth of musical threads of destiny. Importantly, the Fates sing while they spin the 8 hemispheres and sew the threads of destiny into each rim, on each of which a siren sits and sings a single note as she goes around, forming a complete harmonic octave, so that each of us is pictured as a kind of karmic marionette dancing to the siren songs of fate. So the 3 Fates, they sing while they're weaving the threads of destiny into the rims of each sphere surrounding the Earth. And I'm going to say sphere because it seems pretty clear. that Plato did see the universe as a sphere. He just has us imagine the hemispheres so that we can see these threads of destiny being interwoven into each of the interior orbits of the universe. The idea of music, musical vibration, and fundamental strings of the cosmos is important. We'll see in another slide Michio Kaku say that string theory is really a musical theory of the cosmos, and that's how Plato's depicting Socrates present this idea. For now, though, we turn to a later dialogue, the Laws. In the Laws, Plato depicts the Athenian stranger saying, "We may imagine that each of us living creatures is a puppet made by gods. These interior states are, so to say, the chords or strings by which we are worked." So the idea that the gods, who are related to the archetypes which exist at the cosmic horizon, are pulling us in our emotional states by these strings is clearly similar to holographic string theory. Returning to the Republic, the image of the universe as a series of nested hemispheres in the Republic, as opposed to the spherical universe presented in the Timaeus, is probably meant to help us picture the inner structure of a sphere, like geological maps depicting the concentric layers of the interior of the Earth. Mathematical curriculum for the philosopher king, musical threads of destiny. Going back to Book 7 of the Republic, after the divided line analogy and corresponding cave allegory, Plato depicts Socrates planning out the ideal curriculum for teaching students of an ideal state how to escape from the cave of shadows by turning the eye of the soul inward toward a supremely brilliant vision of the idea of the good. As the prisoner who was freed from the cave observed the blinding sun at first only indirectly by observing its reflections in puddles of water, Socrates' assumption is that we can gradually prepare our benighted eye of the soul for the initially disorienting epiphany of the idea of the good by studying its dimmer reflections in the intelligible mathematical forms underlying the visible natural forms. So the divided line says the bottom level is shadows and mirror reflections, two-dimensional images of the higher level up, three-dimensional physical objects in the temporary world. Those three-dimensional objects, including our physical bodies, are like shadows of the lowest level of the eternal realm, the mathematical forms. So those mathematical forms finally are reflections or shadows of the higher level of absolute ideas. To prepare the eye of the soul to open itself to the most brilliant region of being, the idea of the good, first we have to acclimate our eyes to that brilliance by studying the mathematical forms that reflect the idea of the good. I'm saying holographic string theory centered on the gravitational singularity is the mathematical shadow of the idea of the good. And that by studying, and here we have not been studying the mathematics of any of these theories, which I do not know. All I know is that according to the people who do know the mathematics, and when they describe that, the implications of these mathematical theories in the non-mathematical language that they publish their books in, which I read, when I compare those books to books by Jung and Plato and the Vedanta cosmology, I can see clear parallels. I'm just looking for these parallels between the physicists' descriptions of the cosmos and the philosophical descriptions of the cosmos so far from the Vedanta cosmology and Plato's dialogues. Those parallels are clear, and by studying those parallels, we're preparing the eye of our soul to understand and perceive the idea of the good, which again I equate with the psyche equals singularity equation. Five-step ladder of math from number one to the one. So here's the curriculum that Socrates sets out in the Republic, which is the foundation of academia, which came full circle back to the cosmology in Plato's dialogues in the form of Leonard Susskind's holographic string theory, which is extremely ironic because Susskind presents that theory as the ant to the illusion of intelligent design, whereas Plato's original cosmology is an intelligent design cosmology. The universe is intelligently designed by the universal soul, which is in the central point and the outermost sphere. So here's the levels of studying, like steps. You start with the dimensionless concept of individual numbers, starting with 1, like the ABCs of the alphabet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You learn how to count and what is a number. Then you go to a one-dimensional study of how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide those numbers, all of which can be conceived as laying on a one-dimensional number line. Then you study two-dimensional plane geometry on a flat surface on the Cartesian grid after René Descartes. Euclidean geometry. Then you study three-dimensional solid geometry, the geometry of three-dimensional shapes like the Platonic solids. Then you study the fourth dimensional geometry of time as manifest in the periodic movements of three-dimensional solids, specifically the orbits of the planets and stars, which is astronomy, and the vibrations of musical instruments, which is music. So astronomy and music teach us about the fourth dimension of time. The periodic movements of the planets, apparently around the Earth, from Plato's geocentric perspective, tell us about time. The movement of the apparent orbit of the sun around the Earth gives us a day, which adds up to the years. The movements of the planets, that tells us time, and so does the vibrations of musical instruments. How many times does a string vibrate? So studying fourth dimension of time by studying three-dimensional objects in periodic movements. Then the fifth and final stage of knowledge Socrates prescribes is to discover how the previous four steps, representing the four dimensions of space-time, are related to each other and the idea of the good from which they originate, which I'm saying is the gravitational singularity. When that most brilliant form is perceived with the eye of the soul, only then can a person be just in private and public life. So with the advent of holographic string theory, which gives us a more full explanation of the implications of a gravitational singularity in place, we finally have a curriculum capable of opening the eye of the soul to the idea of the good. This was Plato's dream, and it came true despite Susskind's intentions to prove the contrary philosophy, that there is no universal soul. When you fuse Susskind's cosmology with Jungian psychology, you come full circle back to Plato. String theory equals astronomy and music, the capstone of academia. Socrates says that a twofold study of astronomy and music provides the capstone of the mathematical curriculum designed to teach students how to perceive the idea of the good. So here's a quote from Socrates. "We may venture to suppose," I said, "that as the eyes are framed for astronomy, so the ears are framed for the movements of harmony, and these are in some sort kindred sciences, as the Pythagoreans affirm and we admit." So Pythagoras was in Athens before Socrates, and he started a mystery school which had a lot of mathematical secrets. We know the Pythagorean theorem of a triangle, the right-angled triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So the Pythagoreans introduced the idea that there are these eternal mathematical forms which shape and structure the material world. And furthermore, he pointed out the mathematics of music and how mathematical forms equate to beauty when manifest in music. So the absolute ideas of beauty can be described mathematically by the mathematical forms of music. All of these ideas are present in Plato's philosophy and in the Republic. Continuing with the slide, according to Michio Kaku, a co-founder of string theory, the laws of physics can be compared to the laws of harmony allowed on the string. The universe itself, composed of countless vibrating strings, would then be comparable to a symphony. A combination of the cave allegory and the myth of in the Republic, and the spherical mandala cosmology of the Timaeus and Phaedrus reveals a Platonic cosmology that is functionally and structurally similar to the Jung-Susskind synthesis. Seeking a unified field theory, science opens the eye of the soul. So Socrates says, "And what is more, I said, I take it that if the investigation of all these studies goes far enough to bring out their community and kinship with one another, and to infer their affinities, then to busy ourselves with them contributes to our desired end, and the labor taken is not lost, but otherwise it is in vain." So all this mathematical study of the ascending dimensions of nature, culminating with a study of astronomy and music, are in vain if they don't open the eye of the soul to the unifying element, the idea of the good, which shows how all of the dimensions are contained within and radiate from the infinitely brilliant source of all being. Continuing with the slide, Suskind's string theory version of Big Bang cosmology unifies general relativity and quantum mechanics, and correlates to the central soul of the spherical universe and the space-time projecting mother substance of the cosmic horizon in Plato's Timaeus, and the related idea of the good in the cave allegory in the Republic, a vision of which the mathematical study of the four ascending dimensions of nature is intended to initiate. As Socrates explains, it is literally true that when the eye of the soul is sunk in the barbaric slough of the Orphic myth, dialectic gently draws it forth and leads it up, employing the sciences which we enumerated. So the picture there is of Orpheus playing music. He could tame the wild beasts, opening the eye of the soul, which is sunk in the barbaric slough of the Orphic myth. This material ignorance, we wallow in this misidentification of our eternal selves with these temporary material bodies, not realizing that they are just projections from the absolute ideas which exist out at the cosmic horizon. That is all straight Plato. That is also what Leonard Susskind says, and the correlations between Plato's philosophy and holographic string theory were pointed out by some of the most important names in string theory, Xing-Tung Yao and Brian Greene and Michio Kaku. Xing-Tung Yao seems to be an admirer of Plato's. He probably does believe in a universal soul, but Brian Greene and Michio Kaku don't. But still, the way Michio Kaku describes string theory, he actually didn't point out the parallels with Plato, but he pointed out that it's a musical theory of the universe, and that does agree with Plato profoundly, and specifically the cosmology presented in the Republic. I hope you are enjoying this hero's journey into the realm of philosophy, psychology, and physics. If you want to help me create more content like this, please subscribe and consider sponsoring me here on YouTube. You can also click the link to my website, psycheandsingularity.com, to sign up for a multiple-choice test with over 100 well-crafted questions related to this class, and links to the specific parts of each video where the answers can be found. If you take that test to the end, you will receive a certificate indicating that you have become a Psyche and Singularity scholar. In addition to access to that test, there is also the opportunity to answer essay questions that ask you to relate concepts covered in this class to your own hero's journey. I will personally respond to each of those essays, point out any other parts of this class that I think might bolster your plan. Finally, I want to point out that this course is sponsored by the Platonic Mystery School of the Divine Infinite Being, and you can check those guys out at divineinfinitebeing.com.